The photograph appeared without warning. It showed a body lying unnaturally still at the entrance of a residential building. The image was grainy, poorly framed, and yet impossible to ignore. Within hours, it spread across screens, then vanished just as quickly, erased from timelines, search results, and public memory. What remained was not clarity, but unease. This was supposed to be the end of a story. A tragic but simple conclusion. Another young celebrity lost to pressure, exhaustion, or misfortune. That was the explanation offered, and, for a brief moment, it almost held. But then the details began to resist. The body in the photograph did not quite resemble the man people knew. The posture was wrong. The injuries were inconsistent. And later, when fragments of an autopsy report surfaced, they described marks that did not match what the public had already seen. Two versions of the same gun existed, overlapping but never aligning. That was when the silence became louder than any accusation. Yu Menglong was known to the world as a rising star. But behind the curated images and scripted appearances, those closest to him described a life that felt increasingly confined. He rarely appeared alone. He was almost never seen using his phone freely. He communicated with fans through gestures, glances, rehearsed smiles. Always watched, always managed, always escorted. According to accounts that surfaced briefly before being erased, his phone contained no SIM card. It functioned only within a closed system, limiting who he could contact and when. Cameras were said to be installed inside his living space, recording him continuously. Whether these claims were entirely accurate remains uncertain. What is certain is that Yu Menglong lived under a form of control that went far beyond professional supervision. Those who attempted to speak after his gone did not remain visible for long. A lawyer who publicly expressed willingness to represent his family disappeared from public view. A makeup artist posted a message describing unexplained bruises on his body, then deleted it. Friends, acquaintances, and peripheral witnesses fell silent one by one. Some accounts ended abruptly. Others simply stopped updating, as if their owners had stepped out of the world without leaving a trace. In the midst of these fragments, one detail refused to fade. During a recording session shortly before his gone, Yu Menglong was handed a small piece of paper. On one side, it carried a harmless compliment. On the other, two words were written in plain ink. Human doll. Witnesses recalled that his expression changed when he read it. He asked what it meant. Then he exhaled, slowly, as if something heavy had finally settled into place. At the time, few understood the significance of that moment. Now it reads less like a curiosity and more like a warning. Because if a person is treated as an object long enough, there comes a point when their humanity is no longer required. And when that happens, gone is no longer an accident. It is merely the final function. And this story did not begin on the day Yumanglong died. It began much earlier, in the quiet spaces where control replaces care, and where silence becomes the most powerful witness of all. We begin where every investigation begins, with what can be seen, what can be verified, and what refuses to sit still under scrutiny. Yumanglong's gone entered public awareness as a single moment, a single image, a single conclusion. But the record, as it surfaced in fragments, did not behave like a record at all. It behaved like a contradiction. The first anomaly was the photograph. It was not a professionally captured image. It looked like something taken quickly, from a distance, in panic or secrecy. The figure lay near the entrance of a residential building, positioned in a way that suggested collapse rather than careful placement. The lighting was flat. The details were limited. And yet it was enough to ignite a familiar human instinct, to compare what we are seeing against what we think we know. Some viewers insisted it was Yu Menglong. Others said it was not. Not because of a single obvious difference, but because of an accumulation of small inconsistencies. The face appeared subtly wrong. The proportions felt off. The body did not resemble the image of a performer known for a specific build and presence. It was the kind of doubt that does not come from certainty. It comes from discomfort. Soon after, the second anomaly appeared. The report. In cases like this, the official narrative usually relies on one cornerstone: medical documentation, an autopsy, a cause of gone, a sequence of events that can be described without hesitation. Here, however, what allegedly surfaced described details that did not match the public image. There were mentions of post-mortem marks, consistent with a body resting in a position different from what the photograph seemed to show. There were suggestions of bruising that did not align with an ordinary collapse. There was an implication, subtle but unavoidable, that the visible body and the documented body might not have been the same presentation of the same gone. We must be careful here. An autopsy excerpt passed through unofficial channels is not the same as a full report. A screenshot is not a legal document. But in an environment where information is fragmented, people build conclusions from fragments. And investigators, formal or informal, are forced to ask the same question. If the photo was real, why did the report not match it? If the report was real, why did the photo feel wrong? That question opened the door to a theory that would normally be dismissed as absurd. A stand-in, a substitute, a body made to resemble the victim, staged for speed and control, while the true sequence of events occurred elsewhere. On its face, the claim sounds extreme. But extreme claims do not gain traction in a vacuum. They gain traction when the simpler explanations collapse under their own inconsistencies. Then came the human layer. The layer that turns the suspicious gone into a pattern. A lawyer who publicly suggested representation for Yu Menglong's family vanished from public view. A makeup artist posted about bruises that required concealment, then deleted the message. Others named as peripheral witnesses appeared briefly in online discussion, then stopped appearing altogether. Family members, relatives, neighbors, medical staff, and service workers were all described in some accounts as unreachable. Again, we cannot confirm every individual claim, but we can confirm the shape of what was happening. The story did not remain stable long enough for public verification. Any conversation around it became difficult to sustain. Posts disappeared. Screenshots became the only remaining evidence. Names were spoken once, then swallowed by silence. Even the act of asking questions seemed to carry consequences, not always visible, but always implied. And that is the third anomaly, the most unsettling of all. In a typical public tragedy, attention fades because new stories replace the old. Here, attention faded because the ground beneath the story was constantly being removed. The disappearance of information did not create certainty. It created a void. A void has a predictable effect. It invites the imagination to fill it. It invites fear to rationalize it. It invites the most paranoid interpretation to feel, in its own way, logical. So we return to the central problem. Not a conclusion, but a collision. A photograph that does not fully convince. A report that does not fully align. A network of voices that appears, then vanishes. And a young man at the center of it all, whose public life already carried the marks of confinement. If the evidence cannot agree on what we saw, then we must consider what we did not see. Because the most dangerous part of this case may not be the gone itself, It may be the possibility that the gone we were shown was never meant to be the whole story. If part 1 is the case file, then part 2 is the living evidence. Because before the gone became a photograph, Yu Menglong's life had already begun to resemble a controlled environment. Not in the metaphorical sense that fame often demands. In a more literal sense. A life defined by proximity, restriction, and surveillance, so constant that freedom becomes theoretical. People who followed him closely noticed patterns that felt strange, even by celebrity standards. He appeared in public wearing earphones with unusual frequency. He was rarely seen speaking freely to those around him. When he engaged with fans, it often looked like communication by fragments, eye contact, small gestures, minimal words. And, perhaps most striking, he was almost always positioned unusually close to a specific handler, an escort figure who remained within arm's reach. At first, this can be explained away. Security. Scheduling. Performance anxiety. Public relations discipline. A high-profile individual minimizing risk. But then another claim circulated online, briefly, before it disappeared. According to that account, Yumanglong's phone carried no SIM card. It could connect only through limited applications. It functioned inside a closed channel. If true, the implication is not simply inconvenience. It is dependency. A person without a functional phone is a person without an independent line of contact. No emergency call. No unsupervised message. No unmonitored request for help. No private conversation unless someone permits it. Even if we treat the claim cautiously, it aligns too cleanly with the behavioral pattern people had already observed. A man who always stayed close, because drifting even a short distance outside a controlled perimeter meant being cut off. And that is the true psychological design of confinement. You do not need a locked door when you can control the exit. The same account described an even darker detail. Cameras installed inside his home, pointed directly at him, recording continuously. 4 cameras, around the clock. Not merely for security against intruders, but oriented inward toward the subject himself. Again, we must separate certainty from allegation. But we do not need full certainty to recognize what such a setup would do to a human mind. A home is supposed to be the one place where a person can stop performing, where a body can relax, where a face can fall into silence without consequence. If a home becomes a monitored space, it stops being a refuge. It becomes an extension of the stage, only colder, only lonelier, because there is no applause there, only observation. Then there were the names. 2 primary overseers were described in those circulating accounts. A manager. Another man positioned close to the logistics of his daily movement. Whether these individuals held formal authority or simply acted as instruments of it, the effect described was the same. Constant presence. Constant supervision. The steady reminder that every action had a witness. For many people, the word surveillance conjures panic, sudden confrontation, dramatic resistance. But the deeper damage is slower. It is quiet. It is the erosion of personhood. When you live under continuous monitoring, you begin to edit yourself before you speak. You begin to doubt your own instincts. You begin to accept that help is not available unless it is approved. Over time, the nervous system learns a new baseline. Fear stops being an emergency. It becomes the air you breathe. And some who claimed to have seen Yumanglong up close believed he knew exactly where his life was heading. They described him as tense, even in harmless moments. His smiles arrived late, as if he had to remember to deliver them. His eyes, in certain recordings, looked unfocused. Not in a drugged way, in a resigned way. As though his attention was fixed not on the present, but on a countdown that only he could hear. That is why one moment, small and mundane on the surface, now feels like a fracture in the timeline. During a recording session, someone handed him a slip of paper. It looked innocent, a compliment written plainly. He smiled and responded with practiced confidence. Then he flipped the paper over. 2 words stared back at him. Human doll. Witnesses described a subtle shift. A pause that lasted too long. A question asked too softly. What does that mean? Then the exhale. Slow. Heavy. As if his body had been holding tension for weeks, and the words on that paper finally gave it a name. There is no single universally accepted meaning to that phrase. It could be a cruel joke, a coded threat, a private nickname, a piece of dark symbolism, or something else entirely. But in the context of his alleged confinement, the phrase becomes disturbingly coherent. A human doll is an object that resembles a person. It is meant to be controlled, displayed, moved, used. It does not have agency. It does not have a future. It exists to fulfill the will of whoever owns it. If Yu Menglong was living under a system that removed his ability to contact, to move freely, to speak without permission, then the metaphor stops being poetic. It becomes descriptive. And once a person is reduced to function, the ending becomes easier to script. Because the world does not protect dolls. It replaces them. If control explains how a life can be confined, belief explains how that confinement can be justified. By the time Yumanglong's name began circulating in darker conversations, the language surrounding his gone had already shifted. It was no longer only about pressure, management, or exploitation. It became something less tangible and far more dangerous. Meaning, human beings do not tolerate randomness well. When a gone feels too cruel, too sudden, or too illogical, the mind searches for structure. And when official explanations feel incomplete, belief rushes in to fill the vacuum. That is where the spiritual narratives entered. Some claim to hear his voice after gone. Through electronic voice phenomenon recordings, faint sounds interpreted as responses. Whether these recordings were genuine, misheard, or imagined is not the point. What matters is why people listen so closely in the first place. EVP does not gain power because it proves anything. It gains power because it offers comfort. The illusion that the dead are still speaking. That meaning did not end with breath. Others focused on symbols. Symbols are the language of belief because they bypass reason. They do not need proof. They need recognition. In the months following his gone, attention drifted toward performances, concerts, and artistic choices that suddenly felt sinister in retrospect. Red lighting, earth motifs, mirrors. Stage layouts interpreted as ritual geometry. Requests made to audiences that seemed harmless on the surface, yet deeply unsettling when framed through esoteric tradition. Soil. Clean, untouched, free of roots, free of residue. In folklore and occult systems across cultures, Earth is never neutral. It carries memory. It carries history. It carries what has lived and died upon it. To gather it is to gather more than dirt. It is to gather essence. Fire, too, appeared repeatedly in these interpretations. Fire transforms earth. Fire consumes offerings. Fire leaves ash, the residue of sacrifice. When observers noticed the dominance of red tones and flame imagery, they did not see design. They saw intention, and then there were mirrors. In ritual belief systems, mirrors are thresholds. They reflect, but they also collect. They are said to draw energy, attention, and focus. To point a mirror toward an audience is symbolically to reverse the direction of consumption. The performer does not give. The performer takes. None of this proves that a ritual occurred. But belief does not require proof to operate. It requires coherence. And once people began to connect these symbols to Yu Menglong's gone, a darker idea emerged.
The idea of substitution.
In many sacrificial traditions, whether mythological or historical, there is a constant rule. Power demands balance. If something is gained, something must be lost. If fortune is borrowed, it must be repaid. Sometimes with suffering, sometimes with life. This is where the phrase human doll returned, now stripped of ambiguity. A doll is not chosen because it is strong. It is chosen because it is controllable. It does not resist. It does not disrupt the structure. It is placed on the altar because it will not scream loudly enough to shatter belief. In that context, Yu Menglong was no longer seen as a victim of circumstance. He was framed by those who believed this narrative as a vessel, a placeholder, a life positioned at the intersection of control and superstition. We must pause here. This is not an endorsement of occult reality. It is an examination of human psychology. When belief systems become detached from ethical boundaries, they do not remain harmless. They rationalize cruelty. They reframe exploitation as necessity. They allow suffering to be described as purpose. Even if no ritual ever occurred, the belief that one could have occurred already reveals something deeply unsettling. It reveals a world where people are willing to accept the idea that another human being might be destroyed for balance. For luck, for continuation, for success. And that belief alone is enough to cause harm. Because once a person is reduced to symbol, their pain becomes secondary. Their fear becomes irrelevant. Their gone becomes acceptable. Whether Yu Menglong was directly tied to any spiritual practice is something we cannot confirm. What we can confirm is this. The conditions surrounding his life made him vulnerable to every narrative that followed. Control stripped him of autonomy. Silence stripped him of defenders. And belief transformed his gone into something others could use. In the end, belief does not need to be true to be lethal. It only needs enough people to act as if it is. In the aftermath of Yu Menglong's gone, what lingered was not resolution, but an absence. The facts never fully assembled into a single, stable narrative. The case file resisted alignment. His life, examined closely, revealed a pattern of restriction rather than protection. And the beliefs projected onto his gone exposed something darker than superstition alone. Together, they formed a portrait, not of certainty, but of vulnerability. We are left with a young man who lived under conditions that blurred the boundary between care and control. A person whose movements, communications, and even private space were reportedly monitored. A performer whose public image suggested success, while his private reality suggested confinement. Whether every allegation is accurate matters less than the pattern they collectively describe. A pattern in which autonomy steadily disappeared. When autonomy vanishes, danger follows quietly. His gone then became a surface onto which others projected meaning. Symbols were reinterpreted. Rituals were imagined. Coincidences were elevated into narratives of sacrifice. Some found comfort in the idea that his suffering had purpose. Others found fear in the implication that it did not end with him.
But beneath every theory lies a simpler, more disturbing truth.
A system that reduces a human being to function creates conditions where harm becomes possible without resistance. Control does not need malice to be destructive. It only needs indifference. Belief does not need truth to be dangerous. It only needs permission. Yu Menglong's story exposes how easily a person can be stripped of protection when silence replaces accountability. When witnesses fade. When questions vanish. When attention is redirected before it can harden into scrutiny. We should be cautious not to replace one myth with another. The point is not to decide whether a ritual occurred, or whether every detail circulating online is factual. The point is to recognize how quickly a human life can be reframed once its voice is gone. In this case, gone did not bring clarity. It brought narrative control. Others spoke on his behalf. Others assigned meaning to his pain. Others decided what his life and gone represented. And that may be the most unsettling outcome of all. Because if a person can live under surveillance, die under ambiguity, and be transformed into symbol afterward, then the danger is not confined to superstition or scandal. It lies in the structures that allow a human being to disappear without consequence. There is no definitive conclusion to offer here. No verdict that resolves every contradiction. Only a final question that refuses to fade. If someone can be treated as an object long before they're gone, how many others are living the same way, unseen, unheard, and already replaced in the story? The silence that followed Yumanglong's gone did not answer that question. It only made it louder.